So the era of the normal consumer, and I mean really the massive kind of trillion-dollar marketing machine that was built over the last century to serve them, it's it's completely dead.
Yeah, it really is.
And it's wild because every business instinct we're taught, every foundational marketing theory, it basically dictates that we have to chase the biggest possible crowd.
Right, the mass.
Right, exactly. Like the goal has always been to find the center, locate the statistical average and then just scale up by selling to it. But we're looking at some research today, specifically the opening arguments in Seth Godin's manifesto, We Are All Weird. And it really proves why aiming for that middle is actually a really dangerous illusion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a trap.
Yeah, a total trap. So the introductory chapter we're analyzing, it's titled The Pregnant Elephant. And it argues that abandoning the status quo to serve the absolute fringe is pretty much the only viable path forward today.
Yeah.
So over the course of this deep dive, we are going to explore the fatal flaw in chasing mass market appeal in a completely splintered world. And we're going to basically redefine the very vocabulary we use for modern consumers. So words like mass, normal, weird, and rich.
Yeah, and I think that realization that the middle is a trap,
Mm-hmm.
it fundamentally alters the mandate for anyone interested in business or entrepreneurship or even just culture today.
Right, totally.
Because we are living through this period where the legacy structures of commerce, they're desperately trying to resurrect a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
They're operating on a playbook designed for a monoculture that just simply no longer exists.
Right, they're like pretending it's 1995 or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the anecdote that anchors this entire premise, and it gives the chapter its title, actually, it illustrates that desperation perfectly. It's the story of this struggling zoo in Belgium.
Oh, I love this story. It's from the advertising executive Linda Kaplan-Thaler. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And the setup is incredibly familiar for, honestly, any brick-and-mortar business today. Their attendance was just plummeting. The zoo is this physical, localized entertainment venue, and they are competing against the basically infinite digital amusements we all just carry around in our pockets.
Right. The overhead remains completely static. The animals still require feeding.
Exactly.
The grounds need maintenance, but the public has just entirely moved their attention elsewhere.
Right. So then comes this anomaly. An elephant at the zoo gets pregnant.
Which is pretty rare in captivity.
Super rare. And the advertising agency that's representing the zoo, they recognize the novelty of the situation, and they just immediately leverage digital tools to amplify it. So they release a sonogram of the baby elephant on YouTube.
Wow.
Yeah, and they orchestrate all these interactive polls asking the public to guess the gender. They basically manufacture this massive wave of localized cultural hoopla, and the strategy works flawlessly. Like the zoo totally regains its cultural footprint. All the crowds return in droves and the financial bleeding just stops.
Right. And so on paper, you look at this and it is presented as an absolute masterclass in modern marketing.
Totally.
The agency effectively utilized these Web 2.0 tools to basically recapture the general public's attention. But what Godin argues here is that this is actually a tragic misinterpretation of the event.
Wait, why tragic, though? I mean, it worked, right?
Well, it worked once. The success of the pregnant elephant isn't a blueprint for the future. It's a really seductive, dangerous illusion that kind of strokes the nostalgia of legacy marketers.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, the danger really lies in the validation it provides to an outdated worldview. Like when those crowds returned to the zoo, it gave the marketers a fleeting taste of the era they missed the most, which is the era of mass.
Right, because throughout the 20th century, the defining characteristic of an advertising agency was basically its ability to effortlessly purchase the attention of the general public.
Right, exactly. I mean, think about it. There were 3 television networks, a handful of national newspapers, and, ubiquitous radio stations.
Yeah.
You bought the middle, you reached everyone, and you sold average products to average people.
But it's so predictable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the zoo's viral moment, it felt like a return to that predictable, centralized world of mass public amusement.
So it creates this completely false sense of security. It basically tells these boardrooms that the old system isn't broken. They just need to execute better stunts.
Right, better viral stunts.
Yeah, but the underlying mechanics of that success are fundamentally unrepeatable. Like you cannot manufacture a pregnant elephant on demand.
No, you can't.
It's a biological quirk. It's a true black swan event. And when I look at how businesses try to reverse engineer this kind of viral success today, it honestly feels identical to a gambler sitting at a slot machine.
Well, that's a great analogy.
Yeah, like you see someone 3 rows down hit the jackpot and the lights flash, the sirens go off, and the cognitive bias just kicks in. You think, oh, well, the machine pays out. I just need to pull the lever enough times.
Right. The gambler analogy really captures the economics of this situation perfectly. Because these boardrooms are allocating massive budgets. They're essentially pulling the lever over and over, hoping for a viral phenomenon to save a fundamentally average product. They're funding a strategy of pure hope. But a slot machine is engineered to take your money with only the kind of mathematical illusion of success to keep you playing.
Wow, yeah.
So in the modern economy, mass market success is that flashing jackpot. It happens, certainly. A cultural moment will occasionally capture the zeitgeist.
Oh, like the ice bucket challenge or something.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
But you can scale an enterprise. You can't build a reliable supply chain or project quarterly growth based on the hope of a black swan anomaly.
Right. It's basically risk aversion disguised as ambition. Executives authorize these viral marketing budgets because chasing mass appeal, it just feels like the safe, established business practice. But if relying on mass appeal is mathematically bankrupt, it means the very vocabulary we use to describe our customers is basically obsolete. Like if we aren't selling to, quote, the masses anymore, we need to completely overhaul our understanding of who is actually buying.
Which is exactly what Godin does. He breaks this down by redefining 4 foundational words: mass, normal, weird, and rich.
Right. And these redefinitions are really the philosophical core of the whole transition we're discussing. We basically have to strip away the colloquial baggage of these words. So let's take mass first.
Sure.
We tend to use it simply to mean, a large amount of people. But in the context of economics and culture, mass is a highly specific manufactured concept. It is the undifferentiated majority that essentially seeks conformity for the sake of survival. And this is so important. The concept of mass was invented out of necessity to make industrial factories efficient. Right. The causality there is so crucial. The factory didn't arise to serve the mass. The mass was conditioned to serve the factory. Like if you look at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the transition from artisanal, bespoke production to assembly lines, it required intense standardization.
Right. I mean, Henry Ford couldn't build millions of customized vehicles.
The efficiency of the Model T relied on every single car being identical, famously available in any color so long as it is black.
Yeah.
To move that much standardized inventory, you need a standardized consumer base. You basically need a population that is willing to buy the exact same thing as their neighbor.
Which required a massive, massive cultural re-education. I mean, society had to be actively trained to value conformity over individuality.
Right. It wasn't natural.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The entire infrastructure of the 20th century. I mean, from the public education system designed to produce compliant factory workers.
With the bells and the rigid schedules.
Exactly, to the broadcast media, designed to essentially synchronize desires. It was all built to create and maintain this undifferentiated mass. Efficiency was the god of the industrial age, and mass compliance was its fuel.
Man, that structural need for conformity, it leads directly to the second redefined word, which is normal. Because we think of normal as a natural state of being, right? Like that it's just how things are. But it is really just a statistical measurement. It's the fat center of the bell curve.
Right.
And Godin points out 2 vital characteristics about normal. First, it is entirely localized and subjective.
Yeah, the text uses a great contrast for this.
Right, like being a strict vegetarian is considered highly weird in a rural cattle town in Kansas, but it is just the baseline normal in Mumbai.
Exactly.
It isn't an objective truth. It is a geographic and cultural consensus.
The subjective nature of normal is fascinating, but its second characteristic is so much more insidious. Because the industrial machine required standardized consumers to buy standardized products, marketers couldn't just treat normal as a passive statistical observation.
Right. They couldn't just say, oh, look, here's what people are doing.
No, they weaponized it. They elevated normal from a measure of average behavior into a rigid moral and cultural standard.
Whoa, okay, yeah, that is a profound shift in utility. Because when you turn a statistical average into a moral imperative, you aren't just selling a product anymore. You're basically threatening people with social exile.
Right.
Like if you don't wear the normal clothes or drive the normal car or, live in the normal suburban house, you aren't just a statistical outlier, you are culturally deficient.
Exactly.
The marketing industry essentially acted as the enforcement arm for the factory's need for compliance.
It was a highly effective system of social control, just completely disguised as consumerism.
Right.
The pressure to adhere to the normal standard kept the mass market intact, which, kept the factories humming.
Right.
Which is why the third word, weird, is just so incredibly disruptive.
Right, because in this framework, weird has absolutely nothing to do with biology or nature or, uncontrollable eccentricities.
Yeah.
Weird is an affirmative, deliberate choice. It is the active rejection of the mass standard. When someone chooses to be weird, they're looking at the, quote, moral standard of normal constructed by marketers and consciously deciding to opt out, at least in certain domains of their life.
Yeah, it's like booting up a role-playing video game.
Oh, I like that, yeah.
In the mass market era, everyone was essentially forced to play as the default center screen avatar because that was literally the only character class the factories produced.
Right, you couldn't adjust the sliders or pick a weird hair color.
No, exactly. But today, choosing to be weird is realizing you finally have the controller to customize your own stats and aesthetics and class. You're taking agency over your own preferences rather than just accepting the factory preset.
Right. But then the question becomes, why now, right? Like, why are so many people suddenly grabbing the controller and opting out of the default after literally a century of strict compliance?
Right. What changed?
Exactly. And that brings us to the fourth concept, which explains the catalyst for this entire cultural fracture. And that word is rich.
And we have to completely divorce this from the idea of private jets or massive stock portfolios.
Right. It's not financial wealth necessarily.
No, Godin defines rich simply as having enough resources to make choices beyond mere survival. It is the possession of bandwidth. Like if you were spending every waking hour just securing basic caloric intake and physical safety, you belong to the mass by necessity.
Right. You don't have the luxury of choice.
Exactly. But the moment you have excess time health and access, you cross the threshold into being rich because you can finally interact with the market of ideas.
Yeah. The text illustrates this so beautifully with the example of a Swami in a small Indian village.
Oh, yeah, that's such a perfect example.
Yeah, because by traditional Western economic metrics, this man is deeply impoverished. He doesn't own a vehicle. He lacks a traditional home. His material possessions are virtually non-existent. Yet in this framework, he is incredibly rich. He possesses the absolute autonomy to dictate how he lives his life. He has the social bandwidth to influence his community. He isn't trapped in a cycle of pure subsistence, which means he has the extreme luxury of choice.
And I think what's crucial here is that the global proliferation of this specific kind of wealth, this wealth of choice, is basically the engine destroying the mass market.
Wow, yeah.
Because more people globally have the baseline stability and digital access to make choices than at any other point in human history. And when people are rich in choices, they almost universally choose to customize their existence.
Right, they choose to be weird.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you are a business trying to sell a universally normal product to a population that has the wealth to actually demand specificity, you're competing against infinity.
Right, you're offering the default avatar to someone who has already spent hours customizing their own. They don't want the default anymore?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But the friction here is that human beings are fundamentally social creatures.
Yeah.
We want to customize our avatar. We want to reject the kind of sterile conformity of the mass market. But evolutionary psychology dictates that we do not want to be isolated.
Because isolation in our ancestral environment basically meant death.
Right. So when people use their wealth of choice to become weird, they immediately seek out others who have made the exact same choice.
They organize into tribes.
Exactly. Tribalism is the most potent organizational structure in human history. Groups unified by a shared leader, a shared culture, or a highly specific shared interest.
Right. But for centuries, geography basically limited tribal formation, right? Like if you had a highly specific weird interest in a pre-internet small town, you were likely the only one, which basically forced you back into the mass market out of pure loneliness.
Yeah, you couldn't find your people, so you just conformed.
But the digital revolution completely dismantled that geographic barrier. The algorithms that power the modern internet, they basically act as a hyper-efficient sorting mechanism for weirdness. Like if you are obsessed with restoring vintage mechanical keyboards, or you are deeply committed to the subculture of extreme unicycle, you don't need to find someone in your zip code who shares that passion. The internet connects you with thousands of people globally who share your exact iteration of weird.
Which creates millions of highly specific, deeply entrenched silos. And inside those silos, a really fascinating psychological inversion occurs.
Yeah.
Because we talked earlier about how normal is localized, right?
Yeah, Mumbai versus Kansas.
Exactly. So when you step inside one of these digital tribes, you encounter this concept of our normal.
Right, our normal. So to the outside mass market, spending 80 hours a week sourcing obscure 1980s computer parts to build a keyboard is completely bizarre. It violates the mass definition of a normal hobby.
Totally.
But inside that specific subreddit or Discord server, that behavior isn't just accepted, it is the baseline requirement for participation. Like, it is revered. It is their normal.
Right. The label of weird is really only a pejorative applied by the dying mass market to communities. It just lacks the nuance to understand.
Wow, that's a great way to put it.
And this is the systemic failure of the legacy business world. It's this absolute refusal to accept these tribes as the new primary economic unit. You know, corporations, they still insist on forcing a universal mass market normal onto a population that is already fractured into millions of distinct normals.
Right. They're just trying to sell average junk efficiently rather than creating specific value for a specific tribe.
Exactly.
But let me push back on the mechanics of this for a second, because I want to make sure we aren't just, replacing one buzzword with another.
Sure.
If I'm an entrepreneur and I completely abandon the mass market to focus entirely on a specific tribe, let's say the community of barefoot marathon runners, I'm still looking at an Excel spreadsheet, right? I'm still analyzing customer acquisition costs, lifetime value, market penetration. I'm still trying to capture 80 or 90% of that specific barefoot running market to basically maximize my revenue. So from a purely mechanical operational standpoint, aren't these tribes just micromass markets? Like, aren't I utilizing the exact same strategies just aimed at a smaller total addressable market?
Oh man, that is the most common operational trap businesses fall into when they try to pivot to a tribal model. And it fundamentally misunderstands the psychology of the transaction.
Really? How so?
Because you're equating market size with market dynamics. Marketing to even a small localized mass, it relies on forcing compliance. You are using the bullhorn to convince a group of people to alter their behavior, accept a standardized compromise, and adhere to a standard that you define.
So mass marketing is inherently coercive.
It has to be, because you're trying to convince disparate individuals to buy the same average thing. But serving a tribe, it operates on an entirely different psychological axis. It is about alignment, not compliance.
Alignment, not compliance. Okay, break that down.
So you aren't convincing the barefoot running tribe to change their behavior to fit your product. You are identifying a group that has already utilized their wealth to make the affirmative choice to be weird.
Yeah.
Your product is merely a mirror reflecting their pre-existing values.
Okay, wow. That clarifies the distinction immensely.
Yeah.
Because in the mass model, the product comes first, and you basically coerce the audience to fit it.
Right.
But in the tribal model, the audience's choice comes first, and the product is built specifically to facilitate that choice. So I'm not using a bullhorn to yell at a crowd. I'm handing a microphone to a community that already knows the lyrics.
That is a perfect way to phrase it. And that fundamentally changes your role as a creator or an entrepreneur. Your mandate is no longer to dilute your vision to somehow appease the statistical average. Your mandate is to find a specific tribe, intimately understand their specific definition of our normal, and build the tools they need to express their chosen weirdness.
Right.
And crucially, you often have to become a genuine member of that tribe yourself.
Oh yeah, you can't fake it.
No, you cannot fake authenticity to a group of people whose entire identity is built around rejecting the mass market's artificiality. They will sniff it out immediately.
They really will. And honestly, this requires just a massive unlearning of everything the 20th century taught us about success.
Oh, totally.
I mean, we've broken down the illusion of the pregnant elephant. We've stripped the industrial baggage from the words mass, normal, weird, and rich. And we've explored this deep psychological shift from mass compliance to tribal alignment. So when we synthesize all of these concepts, what is the ultimate takeaway from this opening chapter?
Well, Godin synthesizes this by framing it not just as a shift in marketing tactics, but honestly, as the epic defining battle of our generation.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, the fault lines of the future aren't drawn along traditional political boundaries of left versus right or demographic boundaries of age or gender. The ultimate conflict is the friction between the fading, desperate status quo of mass and the relentless rising tide of weird.
The institutions built en masse, like the factories, the broadcast networks, the legacy ad agencies, they are literally fighting for their survival. They desperately need us to remain normal, compliant, and predictable. But it's like the toothpaste is out of the tube, right? The digital infrastructure has made the wealth of choice accessible to billions, and people are just fundamentally unwilling to return to the center screen default avatar once they've experienced the autonomy of customization.
Right. Which leaves the reader and honestly the listener with a profound two-part ultimatum.
Okay, what's the first part?
The first choice is purely strategic. Where are you going to allocate your finite time, capital, and energy? Are you going to bet on the mass market fighting this exhausting war of attrition for a shrinking piece of the crowded average center?
Right.
Or are you going to recognize that all the actual growth, passion, and margin resides at the edges and commit to serving the weird?
I mean, logically, the math heavily favors the edges, but I'm guessing the second part of the ultimatum is a bit more psychological?
Yes. It is a question of courage.
Yeah.
Do you have the confidence to reject the safety net of the average? Are you willing to encourage your customers, your employees, and even yourself to make joyful, highly specific choices rather than just blindly following the system's mandate for normality?
Yeah, because it is terrifying to step away from the crowd.
It is. But as the pregnant elephant story proves, the safety of the mass market is just a nostalgic illusion.
You really can't build a future waiting for an anomaly. I mean, the tide of weird is completely undeniable and the era of mass is dying. But this inevitable transition, it does leave me with a massive structural question.
What is it?
If the shift toward tribalism and individual choice is so mathematically and culturally undeniable, why is the physical infrastructure of our world still actively hostile to it?
Oh, that's the big question.
Right, like why are our educational systems still rigidly structured to produce standardized, compliant students? Why are our corporate hierarchies still designed to basically reward the most average, non-disruptive behavior? If mass is really dead, why is the system fighting so violently to keep it on life support?
Well, it's because the entire global economy of the 20th century was collateralized against the existence of the mass market. Unwinding that is going to be violent. It's going to be messy. And it's going to be fiercely opposed by the people who still own the factories.
Man, and understanding the historical origins of that resistance is exactly what we are going to uncover in our next deep dive as we move into part 1 of the text capitalism industry and the power of mass.
I can't wait.
Yeah, we are going to explore exactly how the system of conformity was meticulously constructed and why it is so incredibly desperate to survive the internet age. So for everyone listening, take a look at the products you're building, the art you're creating, or even the media you're consuming. Are you trying to appeal to the fading middle, or are you holding up a mirror to a specific tribe? Are you playing the default, or are you choosing to be weird? We'll see you in the next deep dive. So what if the concept of normal wasn't actually a natural human trait at all?
Oh man, that's a big something to start with.
Right. But seriously, think about it. What if what you consider normal, like the way you dress, the food you buy, maybe even the milestones you chase in life.
The little white picket fence thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What if all of that was actually just a business strategy, like something invented a century ago, literally just to make factories run more efficiently?
It's a completely disorienting thought, isn't it? I mean, we spend our entire lives trying to figure out where we fit on the bell curve. We agonize over it.
Constantly.
Right? Like, are we ahead of the curve? Are we behind it? Are we safely right under the comfortable center? And we do all of this, assuming the curve itself is just some kind of fundamental law of human nature.
Yeah, we just assume that the center of the curve, the masses, the average, the mainstream, that it's the default setting of humanity. Yeah. But to answer whether that's actually true, we are doing a deep dive today into a really fascinating text we received. It's from Seth Godin's work, specifically this tiny but honestly explosive section called Chapter 2, The Mass Market Redefines Normal.
Yeah, and we are looking at just 2 pages of text here, pages 15 and 16. But the implications are they're massive.
They really are.
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, for anyone listening who is interested in business or entrepreneurship, or frankly, just understanding why our culture looks the way it does today, this is a foundational concept.
It really changes how you see everything.
Yeah, and the core mission of this deep dive is to explore this kind of backward timeline. We're going to unpack the realization that the factory birthed the market, not the other way around.
Right.
So, okay, let's unpack this, because right out of the gate, that premise completely breaks my brain.
It goes against everything we're taught, right?
Yeah, like literally everything in Economics 101. We always assume that the timeline goes like this, a company looks out the world, sees a massive group of people who all naturally want the exact same thing, and then the company builds a factory to give it to them.
Supply meeting an organic, pre-existing demand.
Right. But Godin says that's wrong.
Yeah, which, I mean, it sounds completely logical to think that human desire comes first and industry simply rises up to meet it. But he argues the exact opposite. He suggests that the mass market, which is fundamentally about creating average products for average people,
Right.
was actually invented by organizations that simply needed to keep their factories and their systems running efficiently. The factory came first. The mass market was just a byproduct of the factory.
Let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Yeah.
Are you really telling me that industrialists just built massive factories without knowing if people actually wanted the stuff they were going to make? I mean, somebody must have wanted a washing machine or a standardized car before they built the assembly line?
Right. Well, it's less about them not knowing if anyone wanted the product and more about the brutal economic reality of early industry. Like, think about a typical institution from the mid-20th century.
Okay.
Let's use a bed factory as an example. Or an insurance company. Or a record label. What they all had in common was that they possessed these massive, extremely expensive means of production.
Huge overhead.
Massive overhead.
Yeah.
But what they did not have, and simply could not afford under any circumstances, was mass customization.
Because technology back then just wasn't capable of it.
Exactly. I mean, making a slightly different bed for every single user.
Like maybe you like a firmer mattress or...
Right, or maybe you need one that's a few inches longer because you're tall.
Yeah.
Or writing a highly tailored insurance policy for every individual household's unique risks. Doing that was financially impossible.
So they had to standardize.
The machinery of the era was incredibly rigid. If you had an assembly line making mattresses and you wanted to make one custom size, you had to shut down the entire line, retool the massive steel machines, source different materials, and then start it all up again.
And that takes time.
And every minute that line was stopped, you were hemorrhaging money.
I see. So it would have literally broken the financial model of the assembly line to acknowledge that people are individuals with unique needs.
Precisely. The system fundamentally required uniformity to be profitable. They didn't make average products because people inherently wanted to be average.
Right.
They made average products because it was the only way the math of a 1950s factory actually worked. The infrastructure dictated the behavior.
So if I'm understanding the mechanics of this right, it's kind of like a city building a massive 10-lane highway to nowhere just because they got a huge discount on concrete.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
And once the highway is built, the city planners panic, right? They realize they have to justify this massive capital expenditure, so they start desperately convincing everyone in the city that they need to commute.
Yes.
They zone for suburbs miles away from the city center. They build drive-throughs. They essentially engineer an entire culture around driving, all just so the concrete highway gets used.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. The infrastructure absolutely dictates the subsequent culture.
Wow.
The highway is built, so now we need cars, and we need commuters, and we need a suburban lifestyle, all to feed the highway.
Right.
In the context of our deep dive here, the factory is built to make one very specific, average type of soap efficiently. Now, the company needs to convince the entire country that this one specific type of soap is the only normal, acceptable way to get clean.
Which completely flips the script on how we view legacy success.
Totally.
And as an entrepreneur today, the practical takeaway here is just huge. I mean, if you are starting a business, you don't need to build it assuming you must appeal to everyone.
No, not at all.
Recognizing that mass appeal wasn't some grand, brilliant blueprint for entrepreneurial success, that it was originally just a limitation of primitive manufacturing, that is incredibly liberating.
It was a bug that they aggressively marketed as a feature.
Right. A bug, not a feature.
Exactly. If you're starting a business today and you're pulling your hair out trying to make a product that pleases absolutely everybody, you are artificially operating under the constraints of a 1950s bed factory.
Even though you don't have to.
Right. Even though you have 21st century highly flexible tools at your disposal, you are handcuffing yourself to an old industrial model.
But wait, I have a question about this.
Yeah, go ahead.
If the factory needed everyone to buy the exact same thing just to survive, they couldn't just sit back and hope for the best, right? Humans are messy. We are weird.
We're messy.
We all have different tastes. So how did they actually force people to want the exact same stuff? Because nobody wakes up and says, you know, I really hope I can buy the exact same gray suit as 10 million other guys today.
That is the pivotal question.
Yeah.
If the infrastructure requires conformity, how do you actually enforce it?
Right.
The text dives into what we might call the architects of conformity. And surprisingly, it didn't start with Madison Avenue advertising executives.
Oh, really? Who did it start with?
It started with governments.
Governments.
Yeah, the text points out that governments went first when it comes to enforcing conformity on a massive scale.
Okay, I can see that. I mean, from an administrative standpoint, if you are trying to run a massive nation state, you need standardization.
Absolutely.
You need a standardized tax code. You need public schooling to operate on a predictable schedule. You need military drafts. You can't have a million citizens acting completely autonomously if you're trying to pave roads and fight wars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Governments realized early on that it is vastly easier to dominate, govern, and maintain societal order if you can legislate and control conformity.
Right.
Think about the standardization of time zones, for instance.
That's a great example.
Yeah, that was largely driven by the logistical needs of railroads, which were deeply tied to national infrastructure and government interests. Or look at the public education system of the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
The ringing bells and all that.
Yes. It was largely designed, complete with ringing bells and sitting in organized rows, to train a localized agrarian population how to behave like standardized factory workers.
So governments essentially built the baseline of a standardized citizenry. They conditioned people to accept being part of a mass.
They did, but marketers are incredibly observant.
Oh, they definitely are.
They watched this governmental enforcement of conformity, and they saw a gold mine. They took the concept and ran with it.
How so?
They realized that if they could define a tight center, if they could create a strict, universally accepted definition of what constitutes the masses or what constitutes normal, they could maximize their factory profits exponentially.
I understand the administrative need for order, sure, but how on earth did marketers manage to make conformity feel like a natural consumer choice? Because if a government tells you to do something, it's often under threat of law or taxes. But a marketer has to actually make you want to open your wallet. How do you convince an individual to happily become a cog in a consumption machine?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the psychological mechanisms they used. Marketers didn't just sell conformity as a product feature.
What do you mean?
They didn't say, buy this refrigerator because it's exactly the same as your neighbor's. They sold it as a societal ideal. They equated consumption of mass-produced goods with social belonging and moral standing.
Ah, so this is the classic keeping up with the Joneses mechanism.
Precisely. They weaponized social pressure. Let's look at a hypothetical 1950s ad campaign.
Okay.
If you didn't have the standard mass-produced washing machine, the subtext of the advertising wasn't just that you were inefficient.
It was deeper than that.
Way deeper. The subtext was that you were a bad homemaker.
Yeah.
You were falling behind. You were abnormal. This assumption that everyone should want the exact same things is now built into the very fabric of our culture. The text notes that it determines not just what we buy, but what we actually want out of life.
It essentially becomes the metric for human value.
Yes, that's exactly what it becomes. It dictates how we measure ourselves and how we measure others. We look at people and ask, internally, are they normal?
Are they doing it right?
Right. Are they successful based on the normal metrics? Did they buy the right kind of house, drive the right kind of car, hit the right milestones? The mass market isn't just about selling toothpaste or standardized jeans. It became a cultural standard.
That's wild.
It turned normal into a moral imperative rather than just a statistical average of factory output.
That is incredibly manipulative when you step back and look at it. I mean, if you fall outside that standard, you aren't just viewed as a statistical outlier. You are made to feel like you are somehow getting life wrong.
Exactly.
Which is an incredibly powerful lever for a marketer to pull. The message is basically buy this standard product or risk being outcast as abnormal.
And that is why, when you are designing a product or service today, you have to rigorously audit your own assumptions. Are you building a specific feature because your actual specific audience uniquely wants it?
Or are you just conforming to what you think is expected?
Right. Are you accidentally relying on the lingering invisible infrastructure of 20th century societal conformity? Are you building for a mass market that doesn't actually exist anymore just because that's what business success looks like in the movies?
You know, if you're listening to this right now, I want to pause and address something you might be thinking.
Good idea.
You might be saying to yourself, well, I actually like standard products because mass production makes things cheaper. Standardization brought down the cost of living for everyone.
Sure.
And you're not wrong. Economies of scale absolutely made goods more affordable. But the question is, at what hidden cost? Because the text looks at the actual economics of how this pressure was applied, and it wasn't just gentle nudging to save us a few bucks.
No, it wasn't. And this is where the business strategy becomes somewhat insidious. It's about the dynamic of forced compliance versus respectful choice.
Right.
The text asks a very pointed, brilliant question to illustrate this. Why bother making products for left-handed people if you can figure out how to get left-handed people to buy what you're already making?
Okay, let's look at that left-handed scenario, because that is a perfect, concrete example of forced compliance.
It really is.
It's essentially shifting the burden of adaptation entirely onto the consumer. In the past, I might have used an analogy like, it's like being forced to wear shoes 2 sizes too small just because the factory only makes size 9. But honestly, it's more systemic than that.
How would you describe it?
It's more like the old cable TV bundle model.
Oh, yeah.
Remember how you used to have to pay a massive monthly fee for a bundle of 150 channels, even if you only ever watched 3 of them?
Oh, it was the worst.
The cable company built this massive infrastructure to beam 150 channels to everyone. They couldn't be bothered to figure out how to sell you just the 3 channels you wanted because their infrastructure wasn't built for that kind of customized billing or delivery.
Right.
So they just forced you to subsidize the other 147 channels you didn't want. They used their monopoly on distribution to force compliance because it was cheaper for them.
That is a phenomenal modern analogy. It explains the mechanism perfectly. This raises an important question. Why do organizations do this?
Right.
Why offer respectful choice, like letting you pick your 3 channels or making a left-handed pair of scissors, when forced compliance is so much cheaper for the corporation?
Because if they can force you to adapt, their profit margins soar.
Exactly. If you can use social pressure, advertising, and a total lack of alternatives to force a left-handed person to just suck it up and adapt to right-handed scissors, you win.
You save so much money.
You don't have to retool a separate assembly line. You don't have to manage a separate inventory of left-handed products. You force the consumer to bear the physical and psychological cost of adaptation, rather than the factory bearing the financial costs of customization.
And the text gives a fascinating example from the music industry to show how this forced compliance infects even art and culture, not just physical goods like scissors.
Yeah, this is a great part of the chapter.
They talk about the mindset of a traditional legacy record label. A label executive looks at a new album from a band, let's say the Eagles, and their thought process is, this is the Eagles' next record. We need to make it a record that the masses will buy.
Right.
Because otherwise it won't be a hit, and if it's not a hit, the masses will buy something else and we lose our investment.
Right. And to understand the mechanism here, you have to look at the physical reality of the record industry in the 1970s and 80s. A record label wasn't just a group of people with good taste in music. They were an industrial distribution factory.
Literally a factory.
They possessed a massive physical network. We're talking vinyl pressing plants, fleets of delivery trucks, sprawling warehouses, and hard-fought relationships with gatekeepers at big box retailers and radio station conglomerates.
That infrastructure must have cost a fortune to maintain every single month.
An absolute fortune. That network was incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
To pay for it, they needed platinum records. They couldn't survive on a band selling 10,000 records to a highly devoted niche audience.
That wouldn't even pay for the trucks.
Exactly. They needed millions of units moved just to keep the lights on in the warehouse. So the art itself, the actual music, had to be bent and smoothed out to serve the factory's need for a mass hit.
So they would bring in producers to sand off the rough edges.
Yeah.
Like, hey, this guitar solo is a little too weird. The average listener in Ohio might turn the dial. Cut it.
Precisely. The music had to be made acceptable to the widest possible common denominator. And the crucial point here is they didn't do this because it made the music better.
Right. It had nothing to do with art.
They did it because that was the only way the physical distribution factory remained profitable. They enforced normal on the art.
They couldn't afford to let the Eagles be weird. And, as you're explaining that, it makes me think about modern digital platforms, because a listener might think, well, we don't have vinyl pressing plants dictating culture anymore. But look at the TikTok or YouTube algorithms. Aren't they the exact same thing?
Oh, that's interesting. Expand on that. How do you see them as the same?
Well, the algorithm is basically the new distribution factory, right?
Yeah.
A creator might want to make a really nuanced, slow-paced, deeply researched 40-minute documentary, but the factory, the algorithm, it needs high engagement, fast retention, and massive watch time to serve ads.
Right.
So the algorithm forces the creator to add jump cuts, do silly dances in the first 3 seconds, and use sensational clickbait titles. The creator is bending their art to serve the needs of the digital factory, just like the Eagles had to bend their music for the physical factory.
That is spot on. The distribution factory has gone digital, but the pressure to conform to a mass standard to achieve distribution is exactly the same mechanism.
It's crazy when you think about it like that.
It is. The platform needs you to be normal in a very specific, algorithmic way to keep their ad ecosystem profitable.
Which provides a huge lesson for the modern creator or entrepreneur. If the legacy systems rely on forced compliance, your greatest modern advantage today is your ability to offer what the text calls respectful choice.
Exactly. Legacy companies, the big corporate behemoths, are still largely trapped in the economics of forced compliance. They have all that overhead, so they still have to cut corners on customization to save money.
But smaller guys don't.
Right. A modern, nimble entrepreneur can win by doing the exact opposite. You win by respecting the specific, non-average, weird needs of your audience.
You don't have to force the left-handed person to use the right-handed scissors anymore.
No, you can just design the best left-handed scissors in the world, use targeted digital distribution to find the exact people who need them, and own that devoted market entirely.
Now, I have to stop you here because I'm looking at this from the perspective of a skeptic again.
Let's hear it.
I hear what you're saying about niche markets, but look at Apple today. Look at Amazon. Look at Nike. They are massive. Everyone I know has an iPhone. So are you really saying the mass market is a 1950s relic that's dying out when these monolithic companies exist right in front of us?
It's a very fair pushback, but we have to distinguish between modern scale achieved through network effects and the industrial era mass market that Godin is critiquing.
Okay, what's the difference?
Well, yes, Apple is massive.
Yeah.
But Apple doesn't just sell one identical gray phone to everyone. The iPhone is a platform for infinite customization via apps. Your iPhone looks and functions completely differently from my iPhone based on how we customize our software.
That's true. My home screen is completely chaotic compared to yours, probably.
Exactly. And Amazon is massive, but it's massive because it offers the ultimate respectful choice. The infinite aisle where you can find the most obscure, non-normal product on earth. They aren't forcing you to buy the one standard bed they make. They are providing the infrastructure for millions of niches.
Okay, that makes sense. They've built infrastructure that supports the weird and the custom rather than infrastructure that violently rejects it.
Exactly. But to really understand why the traditional forced compliance mass market is an anomaly, the text looks at historical data. Because we live in a reality where legacy mass market brands still dominate so much of our mental landscape, we just assume commerce has always been this way.
Right.
We assume it's the natural state of business.
But the text proves that the concept of mass is actually a temporary anomaly. It's a historical blip on the radar.
It really is. The data points the author uses here are stunning. Let's wind the clock back to the early days of industrialization before the mega factories fully consolidated power. If we go back to 1918, do you know how many active car companies there were in the United States alone?
I read the number in the text, and it's still hard to fathom.
2,000. 2,000 active car companies.
That is mind-boggling. Today, we think of the big three automakers or maybe a handful of global giants from Europe and Asia, but 2,000 distinct car companies in the U.S. alone. What did that even look like on the ground?
Well, imagine walking down Main Street in a mid-sized town in 1918. You aren't going to a massive, standardized Ford dealership that looks exactly the same as a dealership 3 states away.
Right.
You're probably going to a guy named Arthur at the edge of town. Arthur buys engines from a supplier in Ohio, chassis from a blacksmith in Pennsylvania, and he builds the Arthur Special.
The Arthur Special.
Yeah, and he builds it specifically customized for your town's incredibly muddy, steep dirt roads. He knows his customers by name. He knows what they need.
That means almost every region, every major city had its own localized, quirky manufacturers catering to local specific needs.
Precisely. And then the text gives another example, moving forward a bit to 1925. The most popular saddle maker in the country at that time probably had a 0.0001% market share.
A fraction of a fraction of a percent.
Yeah.
And they were considered the undisputed market leader.
They were.
Right.
Because the idea of a mass market wasn't even a dream for a producer of goods back then. The physical infrastructure simply didn't exist to reach everyone in the country. There was no interstate highway system, no national television broadcast to run ads on.
Right.
So you reached the people who specifically wanted your distinct craft, usually in your geographic area, or via a very specific catalog.
You had a tiny microscopic slice of the overall pie, and that was considered a massive, wildly profitable success.
Exactly.
But contrast that 1925 saddle maker with the heyday of mass market dominance that came just a few decades later. The text highlights Heinz ketchup to show how radically things shifted.
Yes, the Heinz example is the perfect contrast. At their absolute peak in the late 20th century, Heinz could expect that more than 70% of households in the United States had a bottle of their exact ketchup in the fridge.
70% of an entire nation consuming the exact same condiment. That is staggering. Or take Microsoft in its prime in the 90s and 2000s. They knew that virtually every single company in the Fortune 500 was using their Windows software, usually on every single PC and server in the building.
That is the monolith. That is the ultimate apex triumph of the factory mindset.
But how did they go from the era of 2,000 car companies to one company owning 70% of the ketchup market? Was Heinz ketchup really just that objectively superior to every other tomato product on Earth?
It wasn't about the objective quality of the tomato paste. It was about the bottleneck of distribution.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
What we need to realize is that the Heinz and Microsoft examples represent the absolute peak of the mass market, an era characterized by severe bottlenecks. Media was centralized into just a few national TV channels. If you could afford to buy ads on those 3 channels, you earned the nation's attention.
Because there was nowhere else to look.
Right. And physical shelf space in grocery stores was severely limited. If your massive distribution trucks could ensure your ketchup was on every shelf in the country, the local artisan ketchup maker literally had nowhere to sell their product.
The gatekeepers controlled everything. Whoever won the center of the bell curve and could afford to pay the gatekeepers took almost the entire market.
Exactly. But as you and I both know, that peak is firmly in the past.
The bottlenecks have been blown wide open.
Yes. The era of the 2000 niche car producers, or the hyper-local saddle makers, that was the historical reality for most of human commerce before the industrial factory took total control. And as the barriers to entry drop today, as distribution becomes digital, as shelf space becomes infinite on the internet, as targeted ads allow you to bypass national television, we are reverting back to that historical norm of niche commerce.
Which is pretty exciting.
It is. The market-leading legacy organizations of the late 20th century are desperately trying to protect their monopoly en masse. But the technological ground is shifting violently beneath them.
Which means, as an entrepreneur or a creator today, you cannot let the corporate giants of the 1990s dictate your view of success. Having a tiny, deeply devoted market share, like that 1925 saddle maker, is returning as a highly viable and, frankly, historically natural business model.
Right.
You don't need 70% of the country to buy your software or read your newsletter. You just need a fiercely loyal tribe that values your specific respectful choices.
When you put all these pieces together, the backward timeline of the factory, the government and marketing enforcement of conformity, the hidden costs of forced compliance, and the historical reality of niche markets, a really profound realization starts to emerge about the world we live in today.
Let's bring this to a head because the synthesis of these 2 pages we've been unpacking is incredibly powerful. The core, memorable insight that I'm taking away from this, the real soul of this chapter, is that normal is a manufactured illusion.
It really is.
It is not human nature. It is not a biological default. It is a carefully engineered concept designed by 20th century industrialists to make you easier to sell to and easier to manage.
That is the perfect distillation of the text. And it explains so much of corporate behavior today.
It really does.
The reason market-leading legacy organizations fear the weird, the people who don't conform, the niche markets, the unique hyper-specific demands, is because their entire, incredibly profitable ecosystem relies on the myth that everyone should be exactly the same. If the masses stop behaving like predictable masses, the rigid industrial factory simply stops making money.
We didn't collectively choose the mass market because it was the best possible option for our individual happiness or fulfillment.
Yeah.
The mass market molded us, it pressured us, it governed us, and it marketed to our deepest insecurities until we fit neatly onto its assembly lines.
And that realization shifts everything. Once you see the architecture of conformity for what it actually is, a profit preservation mechanism for outdated factories, you stop trying so hard to fit into it.
You can just let it go.
Yeah, you stop judging yourself against a manufactured normal.
Yeah.
And you certainly stop trying to build modern businesses that rely on that illusion of mass conformity.
Which leaves us standing on the edge of a massive, ongoing cultural shift. The illusion is breaking.
It is breaking. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of where society is heading, it leaves us with a fascinating, almost unsettling question to mull over as we wrap up.
Okay, what is it?
If our entire modern society, from how we vote to what we consider successful to how we educate our kids and measure human value, was fundamentally shaped by the logistical needs of 20th century factories, what happens to our culture when those factories finally lose their power to enforce normal?
What happens when the infrastructure of conformity collapses? That is a massive question, because when the masses figure out they actually have the power to stop being normal, it triggers the inevitable end of the mass market itself. And exactly how that collapse plays out and how we can navigate it is what we will dive into next time.
Picture a zoo, right? But this is zoo in Belgium. And it's not a thriving, bustling tourist attraction.
Right.
This place is really struggling to survive. Like, the crowds have completely evaporated.
Oh, man.
Yeah, and frankly, it makes sense. I mean, they're competing with a million other modern amusements. The attention economy is just ruthless, and their attendance is essentially flatlining.
Which is bad for any business, but a zoo.
Oh, it's incredibly grim because, the overhead of running a zoo, it doesn't go away just because the turnstiles stop moving.
Yeah, the animals still need to eat.
Exactly. The animals eat. The staff still needs to be paid. They are running out of options. But then, entirely by chance, their elephant gets pregnant.
Wow. Which is a rather massive new expense right when they are staring down insolvency.
Right. It is exactly what you don't want on a spreadsheet at that moment. But the ad agency working for the zoo does something, well, rather brilliant.
Okay, what do?
They don't just put a picture of an elephant on a highway billboard. They get a sonogram of the baby elephant in utero, and they live stream it on YouTube.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they turn the entire pregnancy into this, interactive spectacle. They start running polls, asking the internet, is it a boy? Is it a girl? When is the exact due date?
Oh, that's smart.
And the result is absolute mass hysteria.
Yeah.
People all over the world become totally obsessed with this Belgian elephant. And suddenly the zoo is instantly back in the black. Attendance shatters records. It looks like, the ultimate triumph of modern marketing.
I mean, it has all the hallmarks of a classic business case study, right? You have a failing institution, a clever digital pivot, and a sudden recapture of mass attention.
Exactly. But, and here's the catch, the reality is much harsher. It worked for the zoo, sure, but you cannot build a business model on pregnant elephants.
No, you can't.
That entire event was a black swan. It was a complete anomaly. And what it actually proves, if you look closely, is that the old way of operating, the idea that you can reliably capture everyone's attention all at once, is completely dead.
Yeah.
The era of normal is over. If you are building a product or a brand or an organization right now and you are aiming for the average person, you're essentially betting on a dying illusion.
It's a terrifying realization, honestly, for anyone trained in traditional business or media.
Right.
Because we have spent an entire century being conditioned to aim for the fat middle of the bell curve.
Yeah, the mass market.
Exactly. The entire infrastructure of commerce is built on reaching the masses. But that middle is actively melting away.
So in this deep dive, we are exploring a really profound transition that we are all living through right now based on our source material. We are walking away from the industrial age, which was fundamentally an era of forced mass conformity.
Right.
And we are stepping into an era defined by almost infinite choice. And in this environment, being weird is not an insult anymore.
No, not at all.
It is actually the core economic engine of our time. So for anyone trying to navigate this culture, understanding why you have to abandon the mass market to serve highly passionate specific tribes, that's the most crucial shift you can make.
It really is. And to really grasp the mechanics of this shift, we have to completely dismantle our assumptions about human nature.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we tend to view normal as a biological or, a psychological default. We look around and think, well, people naturally want to blend in. People naturally cluster around average preferences.
Sure.
But the reality is that normal isn't a natural human state at all. It was a corporate invention.
Wait, really? A corporate invention?
Yeah, the mass market didn't just spontaneously arise, prompting businessmen to build factories to serve it. It happened in exactly the reverse order. The factory created the mass market.
Wait, walk me through that timeline. The machine came before the consumer preference.
Yeah, think about the pure logistics of the Industrial Revolution. Before the factory, if you made a chair, you made it by hand. You could customize it for the specific person buying it, shorter legs, different wood, whatever.
A bespoke chair.
Exactly. But industrial machines require massive, unprecedented scale to be efficient. You have to buy the land, build the factory, source the raw materials, and keep the assembly line running nonstop.
Yeah, it's a huge capital investment.
So to pay for that massive overhead, organizations needed thousands and eventually millions of people to buy the exact same average product.
Because stopping the assembly line to customize the chair for one guy ruins the entire financial model.
Precisely. They couldn't afford mass customization. So if they couldn't customize the product to fit the specific weird preferences of the people, well, they had to customize the people to fit the product.
Wow.
And this wasn't a subtle shift either. 20th century institutions spent billions of dollars engineering the public to comply.
To make them not the average share.
Exactly. I mean, look at schools. Schools adopted factory bells and standardized testing to train compliant workers. Massive advertising agencies were born solely to enforce this mass conformity.
Right, right.
The underlying message was always, you need to buy what everyone else is buying, or you are an outcast.
Oh, totally.
They turned normal into a moral standard because their entire economic model would collapse if people stopped buying average products in bulk.
But wasn't there some baseline element of human nature at play there?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's look at something like Heinz ketchup or Wonder Bread.
Right, yeah.
Those products completely dominated the globe for decades. Didn't they dominate because people just genuinely like them? Like, didn't they just naturally want the same bread?
Well, let's look at the mechanics of the Wonder Bread example because I think it perfectly illustrates the illusion.
Okay.
If you trace the history of baking, for roughly 5,000 years, bread was inherently weird.
Weird how?
It was artisanal, it was local, it relied on the specific yeast in the air of your village, the grains grown in your specific region. We had 5 millennia of incredibly unique, hyper-local baking.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Then industrialization arrives. You build a massive baking factory, and you need everyone to buy the output. So you invent Wonder Bread.
Right.
White, refined, highly processed, and perfectly uniform. Every single loaf is exactly the same.
And it stays fresh on a truck for weeks.
Right. And for about a century, it felt like Wonder Bread was simply what human nature demanded. Everyone bought it. But it wasn't human nature driving that. It was intense marketing conditioning paired with a lack of alternatives.
Right, because the local bakeries got priced out.
Exactly. The factory controlled the distribution channels. You bought Wonder Bread because that's what was at the supermarket.
And now that entire model is fracturing. I mean, the parent company of Wonder Bread faced severe financial crises recently. The mass market for that kind of homogenized product has massively eroded.
Yep.
But meanwhile, you go to any city right now and there are local artisanal bakeries with lines around the block. People are paying a massive premium for, organic, spelt, sourdough, heavily seeded breads. They're earning millions by serving what used to be considered the fringe.
Which proves the point perfectly. Do not mistake 100 years of intense marketing conditioning for baseline human nature.
Yeah.
The average consumer was a very useful fiction engineered by the factory system. But as the factory's grip on distribution and media slips, that average consumer is just vanishing.
So if the average consumer is a myth, the vocabulary we use to talk about business and culture really has to change.
It does.
And the source material provides a fascinating new framework for this. It redefines 4 words that we use all the time. The words are mass, normal, weird, and rich.
Okay.
And we essentially have to throw out the dictionary definitions to understand what is actually happening out there today.
So let's start with mass. In the context of this cultural shift, mass doesn't just mean a lot of people.
Right.
It refers to the undifferentiated majority.
Yeah.
It's the segment of the population that is actively seeking to conform.
Okay, so people who just want to blend in.
Yeah, usually because they are just trying to survive or because they don't want the friction of standing out. It's easier to just do what everyone else does.
Which naturally leads to the new definition of normal. Normal is just the localized characteristics of that mass. It's a moving target, right?
Exactly. It is entirely dependent on geography and culture.
Give me an example.
Well, being a strict, devout vegan might be considered extremely weird in a rural cattle ranching town in Texas.
Oh, for sure.
But it is completely normal in parts of Mumbai or even Los Angeles. Normal is just the catalog of what the masses in any specific environment are doing to blend in.
That makes total sense. And then we get to weird. And this is the pivot point for everything we're talking about today.
Yeah, this is the core of it.
Because weird is not about aesthetic quirks.
Yeah.
It's not about dyeing your hair purple or wearing strange clothes. The definition here is strictly behavioral.
Right.
Weird means people who affirmatively choose not to conform. It is a conscious choice to step away from the mass.
And that element of choice is so crucial because it leads us to the most counterintuitive redefinition in the entire text, which is the concept of being rich.
Yeah, because usually when we say rich, we're talking about bank accounts, private wealth, luxury goods, Wall Street, right?
Exactly. But that's not what it means here at all. In this framework, rich is defined as anyone who has enough resources and time to make a choice.
A choice.
Yeah. Wealth is not just a ledger of capital, it is the power to exercise preference in the marketplace.
The source gives this incredible illustration of this that I think grounds the concept perfectly.
The lantern, right.
Yes, it describes an Indian fruit vendor working in a tiny village. By any traditional Western economic metric, this man lives in extreme poverty.
Right.
You might make, I don't know, $3 a day.
Right.
But he managed to save up and buy a D-Light solar lantern for his home.
And the key detail there is that he wasn't handed this lantern by a relief agency or a charity.
Exactly. He evaluated the options available to him, he saved his resources, and he affirmatively chose to purchase that specific lantern because it fit his specific needs.
Therefore, in this economic model, he is rich.
Wow.
He has entered the marketplace as a chooser. He isn't just accepting whatever the local monopoly forces on him to survive. He is exercising preference.
Right.
And when you realize that there are billions of people globally who might only have a few dollars to their name, but who now have the connectivity and the surplus to demand choices, well, you begin to see why the old mass market is so terrified.
It totally recontextualizes human history.
Yeah.
Like the text brings up the prehistoric cave painters as Chauvet in France.
Oh, this is a great example.
We are talking 17,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Why did they paint the walls? Why are they considered rich in this framework?
Because their society had achieved a crucial threshold, which is surplus.
Right. They had gathered enough calories, enough food, and secured enough safety that they didn't have to spend every single waking second of the day foraging just to stay alive.
Yeah, they weren't purely in survival mode anymore.
Exactly. That slight surplus of resources gave them the time to make a choice. They chose to spend weeks painting stunning artwork on a cave wall. They had the surplus to allow for a choice beyond bare survival.
And today, because of insane productivity gains over the last century, billions of people have that surplus of choice.
Right. And when human beings have a surplus of choice, they inherently use it to splinter away from the normal center.
We see this everywhere now.
Yeah, you see this mechanically in almost every sector of society. Look at the political landscape, for example.
Right.
When communication and organization costs drop to effectively zero, voters who previously compromised to fit into massive center-right or center-left coalitions, they realize they don't have to anymore.
Yeah, they don't have to settle.
They splinter off. You see the mechanics of this with movements like the Tea Party on the right or the Green Party on the left.
And just to be clear for the listener, we are not taking a stance on the politics of either of those groups here.
Oh, absolutely not, no.
The source is purely analyzing the mechanics of how internet organizing causes ideological splintering. It's not endorsing the politics, just observing the mechanism.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of the mechanism at work. When people have the tools and the freedom to choose, they stop settling for the homogenized center. They splinter into highly specific, highly motivated ideological tribes.
Right.
And the practical takeaway from all of this is that if you are creating anything, a deep dive podcast, a product, a piece of software, your target demographic is not defined by their income bracket.
No, not of it.
It is defined by their passion and their ability to make a specific choice. You are looking for the rich choosers.
But, that raises a critical question. Human beings have always wanted to express preference. The desire to be weird isn't a new invention.
Right, like the cave painters.
Exactly. So why is the world suddenly fracturing into all these weird tribes right now? Why didn't the mass market collapse 50 years ago?
That brings us to the 4 massive forces that are currently amplifying weird and tearing down the mass market. It's like a perfect storm of technological and cultural tailwinds hitting all at once.
Yeah, it's a huge convergence.
What's the first force?
The first one is amplified creation. Historically, if you wanted to write a book, record a song, or design a product, you needed the backing of a massive institution.
Right, you couldn't just do it in your garage.
No, you needed a publishing house, a record label, or a factory. And those gatekeepers protected the mass market by only greenlighting projects they thought would appeal to the average consumer.
Because they needed to recoup their huge investment.
Exactly. Today, the cost of creation has absolutely plummeted. Anyone with a laptop can publish a novel, record an album, or design a 3D printed prototype.
Yeah.
The gatekeepers have been completely bypassed.
Which feeds right into the second force, which is wealth and productivity.
Yeah, and we touched on this with the concept of surplus earlier. Because of compounding technological and industrial advancements, our basic survival requires a fraction of the time and labor it used to.
We just have more free time.
Yes. We collectively have more time and more disposable income to actively seek out our specific niches. We have the breathing room to be obsessive about our hobbies in a way our ancestors just didn't.
And then there's the third force, which is efficient marketing, or the math of the long tail.
This is a crucial mechanical shift. In the physical retail world of the 1980s or 90s, shelf space was finite.
Right, physical stores.
Yeah, a local record store only had room for so many CDs. Therefore, they could only stock the hits, the mass market albums that they knew the average person in that town would buy.
Because if they stocked some weird indie album, it would just sit there taking up valuable real estate.
Exactly. If you made a highly specific niche product, it was mathematically impossible to find the few people spread across the globe who wanted it because physical stores just wouldn't stock it.
But the internet has infinite shelf space.
Exactly. Efficient digital marketing allows sellers to target extreme edge cases with microscopic precision.
Yeah, through SEO and targeted ads.
Right. You don't need prime shelf space at a big box retailer anymore. You can find the exact 1,000 people on Earth who want your specific creation no matter where they live.
Which perfectly leads to the final force, connected tribes. The internet completely eradicated physical proximity as a barrier to finding your people.
I think we really need to think about the psychological impact of that.
It's massive. I always think of the internet as a kind of time machine that resurrects abandoned ideas.
How so?
Well, before this connectivity, if you had a weird obsession, let's say you were deeply passionate about restoring 14th century armor, or, I don't know, building custom mechanical keyboards.
Okay, pretty niche.
Yeah, very niche. You were likely the only person in your zip code who cared about it. You were geographically isolated. You were just the weird guy in town.
Yeah, you were lonely. And eventually, most people in that situation simply gave up their obsession and conformed to the local normal.
Right, because the social pressure to conform is strong when you're alone.
Right.
But today, if you have that obsession, you log online and instantly find a thriving community of 10,000 other people across the globe who share your exact passion.
Yep. Huh.
You aren't a lonely weirdo anymore. You are a member of a connected tribe.
There is a brilliant example in the source material that I think perfectly encapsulates all 4 of these forces interacting simultaneously.
Oh, is it the Jack Zolkin story?
Yes, the Jack Zolkin story.
The typewriter guy. I love this example so much. It's just so vivid. So Jack Zolkin goes on to Etsy, and he takes vintage mid-century manual typewriters.
The old school ones.
Yeah, the clunky, heavy, beautiful mechanical typewriters.
Yeah.
And he rebuilds them by hand. But the genius part is that he wires a USB cable into the back of them.
Okay.
So you can take this 50-year-old typewriter, plug it directly into an iPad, and type a novel on a digital screen using the heavy mechanical keys of a vintage machine. And he sells them for something like $400.
It is the ultimate anti-mass market product.
It is so incredibly specific. No corporate committee at a Fortune 500 tech company would ever, in a million years, greenlight a USB typewriter for an iPad.
Never. The focus groups would laugh them out of the room. They would say, the average consumer just wants a sleek, silent Bluetooth keyboard.
Exactly.
And the focus group would be right about the average consumer. But Jack Zolkin isn't building for the average consumer.
Right.
He is building for the weird. And because of the four forces, he can build a thriving business.
Let's break that down with the forces.
Okay, so he has the tools to create it cheaply, which is amplified creation. His buyers have the disposable income to spend $400 on a novelty writing tool. That's the wealth force.
Right, the surplus.
He can market it directly to hipster novelists and tech enthusiasts online, which is efficient marketing. And those buyers talk to each other in dedicated forums and Reddit threads, which is the connected tribes force.
It's perfect. But wait, let me challenge this entire premise for a second.
Okay, go for it.
We are sitting here saying the mass market is dead, and it's all about small tribes now.
Yeah.
But isn't the internet actually just creating new, even bigger mass markets? I mean, look at Amazon.
Amazon.
That is the biggest mass market retailer in human history. Doesn't Amazon prove that mass is still king?
It's a really great question, but I think you have to look at what Amazon actually is. Amazon is not a mass market product.
It's not.
No. Amazon is a mass market fulfillment engine for the long tail.
Explain that.
When you go to Amazon, you and I are not seeing the same homepage.
That's true.
We aren't buying the exact same average products. Amazon brilliance is that it aggregates millions of weird niche tribes. It's not selling one product to a billion people. It's selling a million different niche products to a million different tribes, all using the exact same shipping infrastructure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Amazon is successful precisely because it caters to the infinite weirdness of the melting bell curve.
Oh, that makes total sense. They aren't forcing conformity at all. They're monetizing the fragmentation, which brings up a terrifying prospect for traditional legacy businesses. The old guard is built entirely on forcing conformity. And if they want to survive, they face what the text calls the choice of who to disappoint.
This is where the theory hits reality, and it causes immense anxiety in corporate boardrooms.
I can imagine.
If you visualize the statistical bell curve of human behavior back in, say, 1955, it was incredibly tight. It looks like a steep, sharp mountain peak.
Right. Everyone was clustered in the middle.
Almost everyone watched the same 3 television channels at 8 p.m. Everyone bought the same brand of laundry detergent. Everyone wore the same style of suit to the office.
The mass was truly massive.
Exactly. But today, picture that steep bell curve, like an ice sculpture that has been left out in the hot sun. It has melted.
Yeah.
It has flattened out into a long, low, wide puddle. The edges, the extremes on either side of the curve, the weirdos, are now actually bigger in aggregate than the people left standing in the center.
And this causes pure panic if your entire business model, your entire supply chain, was built to service that fat center.
Absolute panic.
Because the harsh truth is that you cannot transition to serving the edges without alienating the center. If you want to cater to a weird tribe, you must actively disappoint the normal mass.
You really do. You cannot be all things to all people. In a world of infinite choice, a product that tries to please everyone ends up being deeply important to no one.
That is so true. There are 2 hospitality examples from the text that I think highlight the stakes of this choice perfectly. Let's look at the ski resort at Jackson Hole.
Oh, classic dilemma of identity versus scale.
Right. So Jackson Hole is legendary for having intense, steep, expert-level terrain. Their specific weird tribe consists of hardcore extreme skiers.
Right.
But the management of the resort faces this constant, agonizing pressure. They look at the numbers and think, should we bulldoze some of this extreme terrain? Should we build a generic, gentle slope and a massive, easy-to-access lodge for beginners?
Right, to get more people in.
Yeah. Should we cater to the normal, average family vacationer?
And the temptation to do that is overwhelming because the mass market always looks like easy, reliable money.
But the argument here is that if Jackson Hole chooses to appease the normal mass, they lose their soul.
Yep.
And more importantly, they lose their best, most loyal customers.
Yeah.
The extreme skiers will notice the shift. They will feel betrayed, and they will just pack up their gear and go to Aspen or somewhere else that respects their specific brand of weirdness.
Exactly.
Jackson Hole has to have the courage to disappoint the average vacationer in order to remain vital and essential to the extreme skier.
And when companies lack that courage, they try to split the difference. They try to have it both ways.
Which never works.
No, and that leads to the phenomenon of fake weird, which always, always fails. The text explores this through the lens of a specific corporate hotel in Los Angeles, the Andaz, which is operated by Hyatt.
Oh, the fake weird hotel. It's so painful to read about.
It really is. It is a massive, highly structured corporate mass marketer attempting to masquerade as an edgy, independent boutique hotel.
But they can't actually take any real risks Because they are a corporation.
Exactly. So how do they manufacture weirdness? They use focus groups.
Oh, gross.
Mm-hmm.
They design quirky features by committee.
Right.
Like they have a perfectly curated, slightly torn vintage Beatles poster hanging in the lobby. Or leaving a bespoke little eraser on the desk in the room that just has the word oops printed on it.
It is entirely calculated, and the reason fake weird fails is because it lacks humanity.
It really does.
It lacks the actual risk of true obsession. True weirdness is polarizing. It means someone actually put their distinct, unapologetic vision into the world. Fake weirdness is just, well, it's just annoying.
It's pure pandering. And the irony is they end up pleasing literally nobody.
Nobody at all.
Because the people who actually want a weird, authentic, edgy hotel experience can smell the corporate boardroom on that oops eraser from a mile away. They roll their eyes and book an Airbnb or a real boutique hotel. And then the normal mass market business travelers who just want a predictable, quiet, clean room with a normal desk, they get annoyed by the fake quirkiness too.
Which leaves the hotel with no tribe at all.
Exactly.
This raises a fundamental question for anyone listening. Who are you willing to disappoint?
That's the million-dollar question.
The practical takeaway is that to be truly important, to be truly essential to a specific group of people, you must have the courage to actively disappoint the slightly engaged masses.
Yeah.
You have to be okay with someone looking at your work and saying, you know, this isn't for me. In fact, that should be your goal.
That is such a powerful reframe. So if we step back and look at the entire landscape we've mapped out today, from the factory inventing the concept of normal, to the new definitions of rich choosers and weird tribes, to the four forces melting the bell curve, what is the ultimate realization here?
I think the core insight is that being weird, choosing your specific obsessions, finding your niche, it is not some modern fringe anomaly. It is actually a return to our natural human state.
That completely flips the script.
It does. We have this lingering bias that the 20th century was the baseline for how human commerce and culture should function.
Because that's what we grew up in.
Right. But the 20th century, with its mass production, its synchronized mass media, and its forced compliance, that was the historical aberration.
Wow.
True freedom is the freedom to choose. And when human beings have the resources and the connectivity to express their freedom, they invariably choose to be weird. They choose to specialize.
They choose to find their specific corner of joy, just like they did for thousands of years before the assembly line told them not to.
Exactly. Therefore, weird isn't just a trend. It is the ultimate assertion of our humanity. It is a rebellion against being treated as a replaceable cog in an industrial machine.
I love that.
And practically speaking, if you are a creator, a business owner, or a leader, it is the only viable path forward. The objective of your work can no longer be to hunt for a mass audience.
Because it doesn't exist anymore.
That audience is an illusion that is rapidly fading. Your objective is to find, to serve, and to lead a specific tribe.
Humanity, connection, and specificity are finally trumping corporate scale. That is an incredibly energizing thought.
It really is.
And it leaves us with a final provocative idea from the text to really chew on. We've spent this entire time talking about the mechanics of business and marketing, but you can apply this to the deepest parts of our society.
Oh, absolutely.
What happens if our schools stop obsessing over standardized tests and stop punishing kids who don't fit the exact center of the bell curve?
Yeah, what if they celebrated the edges?
Yeah, exactly. What if our workplaces stop demanding uniform compliance? What if our own internal monologues stop berating us for not being normal, and we start actively looking for the weird?
When you stop trying to fix the people at the edges of the curve and instead figure out what weird obsession they excel at, and you pour fuel on that fire, you don't just build better businesses. You unlock human potential that the factory system spent a century trying to suppress.
It changes everything. It is a beautiful vision of where we are heading.
Yeah, it is.
But of course, it begs a huge practical question. Now that we know the mass market is dead and the tribes have taken over, how do you actually earn the trust of these highly skeptical, incredibly connected weirdos?
That's the hard part.
Especially when they are so hypervigilant against anything that smells like that corporate imposter at the fake weird hotel.
Right. Leading a tribe requires an entirely different toolkit, a different kind of empathy, and a different cadence of communication than managing a mass market.
And that is exactly the puzzle we're going to solve next time. We're going to dive deep into the actual ground-level mechanics of tribe leadership. Until then, keep digging into your own specific obsessions, and thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
So I want to start by asking a question, a bit of a hypothetical for you listening right now. What if the biggest threat to your business or, your career or whatever project you're currently building, what if the threat isn't some massive corporate competitor?
Right. It's not the giant conglomerate with $1 billion R&D budget.
Exactly. What if it's just, well, a passionate amateur sitting in their bedroom somewhere doing exactly what you do, but just doing it for fun?
I mean, if you were running a legacy business right now, operating under the old rules of capitalism, that is a completely terrifying reality to confront.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we're living through this structural collapse of the old gatekeepers, like the executives, the publishers, the factory owners who used to dictate who was allowed to create and who was allowed to consume.
They held all the keys?
They did.
Yeah.
But those walls have essentially evaporated. And in their absence, we've entered this era where everyday creation is amplified exponentially.
Yeah.
The passionate amateur is, they're no longer just a hobbyist on the fringe. They are genuinely the new center of cultural and economic gravity.
Which is just wild to think about. So how did the amateur suddenly get the power to overthrow the professional? Because that is the core tension we're tackling today.
Right.
In this deep dive, we are dissecting a really massive paradigm shift from our source material today, which is this concept that creation is amplified. We're going to explore how the digital revolution didn't just, democratize information, it completely democratized creation.
That's the key distinction.
Exactly. So we'll look at why these amateurs are rivaling professionals in incredibly complex fields and why understanding this sort of tribal shift is honestly the most critical survival skill you can develop today.
Yeah, because whether you're trying to launch a startup or pivot a traditional corporation or just, find an audience for your art, the old playbook is completely dead. It's gone. We are moving from a culture of pure consumers to a culture of creators. And the friction that used to stop us from creating has just gone to zero.
And I really want to dig into that idea of friction going to zero, because that's the fundamental mechanism here, right?
Exactly. For centuries, if you wanted to make any kind of impact on culture, you basically needed three things. You needed specialized training, massive capital, and permission.
Permission being the big one.
Right. Just think about the physical infrastructure required just to share a single idea like 50 years ago.
Okay, yeah, let's look at a seemingly simple example from the text, like designing and selling a t-shirt.
Okay, great example.
If you were a teenager in, say, 1985, and you had a cool design idea, the friction to get that shirt out into the world was just astronomical.
Oh, it was a nightmare.
Right. You couldn't just sketch it out and be done. You had to physically find a screen printing manufacturer.
And you had to negotiate a minimum order quantity, which meant you needed upfront capital.
Yeah, maybe a few $1,000s just to get the first batch printed. And then, okay, what do you do with them? You have to figure out warehousing. You had to physically mail catalogs or buy incredibly expensive magazine advertisements.
Or try to convince a retail buyer at some department store to actually give you shelf space.
Exactly. It was this heavily gated, super capital-intensive process.
And every single one of those gates was guarded by a professional whose literal job was to say no.
Right, the bouncer's at the door.
The manufacturer could say your order was too small. The magazine could say, well, your ad doesn't fit our aesthetic. The retail buyer could say your design just won't sell to our demographic.
So you were completely reliant on top-down permission.
100%. But today, the architecture of how we produce and distribute goods has been completely inverted.
So walk me through the mechanics of that inversion. Like, what does that look like for that same teenager today?
Well, today, you mock up a design on your laptop in like 20 minutes using intuitive, usually free graphic design software. You don't even need a manufacturer in the traditional sense. You just use an API integration to connect your digital storefront directly to a print-on-demand facility.
So no minimum orders?
None. When a customer in London buys your shirt, the software automatically routes the design to a printing facility in the UK. They print that single specific shirt and they ship it directly to the buyer.
And you never even touched the inventory?
Never touched it. You never paid for warehousing. You definitely never asked a retail buyer for shelf space. You just bypass the supply chain entirely, using software as your leverage.
And it's the same for pretty much anything now. I mean, throwing a massive event used to mean hanging flyers on telephone poles and just, hoping it didn't rain.
Yeah, hoping people actually saw it.
Right. Now, you can mobilize thousands of people in an afternoon using algorithmic targeting or writing a book. That meant sending hundreds of query letters to agents in New York and just praying one of them plucked you from the slush pile.
Which was so rare.
Exactly. Now, you format an ebook over the weekend, you upload it to a global marketplace, and you just let the algorithm find your specific readers based on their highly granular search habits.
And what is crucial to recognize here, especially for you listening, is that these are no longer highly gated technical skills.
Right. Yeah.
They have transitioned into cultural skills.
Mm-hmm.
Like human beings have always been creators by nature. We express ourselves, we tell stories around campfires, we modify our clothing to signal our identity.
We want to participate in culture.
Exactly. The digital revolution didn't invent the desire to create. It simply handed out the tools to everyone and fired all the institutional bouncers at the door.
Okay, but I want to dig into what happens after you use those tools, because it's not just about the act of creating being easier. It's about this, what the text calls the poke back effect.
Oh, a poke back. Yeah.
Put something out there and the environment reacts. Can we break down the mechanics of that cultural layering?
Sure. Think about it as a continuous, massive feedback loop. When you put a creative idea out into the world, let's call it a poke, the infrastructure of the web ensures that it doesn't just sit in a vacuum.
It doesn't just disappear.
No, it gets indexed, categorized, and distributed. Like-minded people see it, and they poke back.
Give me an example of that.
So say you write a piece of open source code, and you push it to a repository. Instantly, a developer in Mumbai sees a flaw in it, patches it, and pushes it back.
Okay.
Then another developer in Berlin takes that patched code and builds a beautiful user interface right on top of it. New culture is being generated on top of old culture, layer by layer in real time.
I always visualize this like a giant digital coral reef.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, because if you look at the old model of culture, it was like a printed encyclopedia. It was a static artifact.
Very top down.
Exactly. A team of anointed experts sat in some oak-paneled room, decided what the official facts were, printed them in heavy leather-bound books, and sold them to you.
And you were a purely passive consumer. You couldn't just, add a paragraph to the encyclopedia.
Right. But this new cultural layering, the coral reef, it's alive. A tiny organism, a creator, puts down a little piece of calcium, maybe it's a piece of code or a drawing.
Mm-hmm.
They might even abandon it, but it remains there. And then the next creator comes along and builds directly on top of that calcium shell. And it scales exponentially because everyone is building on everyone else's foundation simultaneously.
I love that coral reef analogy because a reef thrives on complexity and mass participation.
Yeah.
The encyclopedia was a top-down broadcast. It was a one-to-many relationship. But the reef is a bottom-up conversation. It's a many-to-many relationship. And because the barrier to entry to join that conversation is zero, the reef is growing at an unprecedented speed.
Wait, hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because this is where a lot of people get really cynical.
Fair enough.
If everyone is participating, if everyone is shouting and building and creating T-shirts and code and poems at the exact same time, doesn't it just become an unbearable wall of noise?
I hear that critique a lot.
Right. I mean, if millions of people are uploading content every single day, how does anything meaningful actually break through the static?
Yep.
You say it's a beautiful coral reef, but to a lot of people, it just looks like a giant landfill of mediocre content.
That is the most common critique of democratization, hands down. But it's rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern distribution actually works.
How so?
Well, if you are still operating with a broadcast mindset, then yes, it looks like noise. If you're trying to stand in the middle of the internet with a megaphone and shout your message to all 8 billion people on Earth, you will absolutely be drowned out.
Because everyone else has a megaphone too.
Exactly. But you aren't trying to reach everyone anymore. The amplification of creation has completely aligned with the rise of hyper-specific algorithmic curation.
Okay, algorithmic curation. Explain how that solves the noise problem for the listener trying to build something.
So, when you put your poke out into the world today, you aren't shouting into a void. You are emitting a homing beacon.
A homing beacon.
Yeah. Let's say you upload a highly technical 3-hour video essay on the history of obscure 1970s analog synthesizer.
Yeah, okay. Super new.
To 99.9% of the population, that is pure noise. They don't care. They will scroll right past it.
Right.
But the algorithms that govern our platforms are designed to monitor behavior and watch time and engagement.
Right.
The platform recognizes that a small cluster of people watched your entire 3-hour video. It then actively looks for other people with similar behavioral clusters and serves your video directly to them.
So the meaning breaks through not because it's the loudest, but because the system is designed to route the specific signal directly to the specific receiver.
Precisely. It doesn't need to appeal to 100 million people to be successful. It just needs to resonate deeply with a small, specialized tribe of people who are obsessed with the exact same weird, specific thing that you are.
The tribe curates the meaning for themselves.
Exactly. The noise is filtered out by the infrastructure itself, leaving only the high-value signal for those who actually care about it.
So the practical takeaway for you listening right now is deeply practical. You have to stop acting like you need permission.
Yes.
You no longer need to wait for an editor to greenlight your manuscript or, a venture capitalist to fund your software prototype or a factory to build your product. The gatekeepers have left the building.
They're gone.
You have the tools, the distribution is free, and the algorithms are literally waiting to connect you to your tribe. Stop waiting to be picked. You have to pick yourself and just initiate the poke.
Which naturally brings us to the evolution of the people who are initiating those pokes. We're seeing the rise of what we can call the pro-am revolution.
The professional amateurs. People who are doing professional quality work, but without the professional title or the traditional paycheck.
And this isn't just happening in subjective fields like art or music. That's the crazy part. It is disrupting highly rigorous, incredibly complex technical domains.
It really is.
We are seeing amateurs discovering asteroids. We are seeing them govern the largest repository of human knowledge in history. We're seeing them write the foundational code for global operating systems.
Okay, let's unpack those examples because I think they sound almost impossible if you don't understand the mechanisms behind them. Let's start with discovering asteroids.
Sure.
How does a passionate amateur sitting in their backyard rival a multi-billion-dollar space agency?
It all comes back to the open sourcing of tools and data. Decades ago, if you wanted to hunt for near-Earth objects, you needed a PhD in astrophysics, right?
Right.
And you needed to secure precious, highly competitive time on a massive telescope at an observatory.
Which was nearly impossible for a regular person.
Completely impossible.
Mm-hmm.
Today, major space agencies and universities are pushing terabytes of raw sky survey data onto the internet.
What?
They literally can't analyze it fast enough.
Wow.
So an amateur sitting in their living room can download specialized open source software like Astrometrica, for example, and start blinking images.
Wait, blinking images? What is that?
It's a technique where you take photographs of the exact same patch of the night sky at different times, and you rapidly flip between them on your screen.
Okay, so like a flip book.
Exactly like a flip book. The stars stay perfectly still, but an asteroid or a comet will appear to jump or move against the static background.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Amateurs are analyzing data sets that professionals just don't have the manpower to process. They identify a moving object, submit the coordinates to the Minor Planet Center, and if verified, an amateur just contributed to global planetary defense.
And they're doing this after they finish their day job as like an accountant or a teacher.
Exactly. It's their hobby.
That is just wild. They are utilizing the exhaust of the professional institutions. But what about something like Wikipedia? Because I think a lot of people dismiss Wikipedia as just crowdsourced, which kind of sounds like a chaotic free-for-all.
Yeah, a lot of people assume it's just the Wild West.
Right. How do amateurs maintain an encyclopedia that rivals Britannica in accuracy without it devolving into complete anarchy?
The governance structure of Wikipedia is actually one of the most fascinating examples of this pro-am revolution. It isn't anarchy at all. It's a highly sophisticated, amateur-run bureaucracy.
Bureaucracy, really?
Yes. The professionals at Britannica relied on credentialism like, you have a degree, therefore you are qualified to write the article. Wikipedia relies on a ruthless system of peer review and version control.
So how does that governance actually work under the hood?
First, every single change is tracked. If someone vandalizes an article, automated bots catch obvious defacements within milliseconds and revert them.
Okay, so the easy stuff is automated.
Right. But for more nuanced debates, you have the talk pages behind every article. This is where the real pro-am work happens. Amateurs debate sources, bias, and phrasing based on strict internal policies, like the neutral point of view mandate.
And what happens if they can't agree?
If a dispute can't be resolved locally, it escalates up a hierarchy of volunteer administrators, and eventually it can go to an arbitration committee.
Wait, an arbitration committee?
Yes, which is essentially a Supreme Court made up entirely of elected amateurs.
That's incredible.
They are doing the tedious, rigorous work of historical documentation and conflict resolution, all for zero financial compensation.
But why, though? I think that's the part that really short-circuits the traditional capitalist brain.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense on a spreadsheet.
Right. Why would someone spend 40 hours a week mediating disputes about the history of the Byzantine Empire or, writing printer drivers for a Linux operating system for free?
Because we severely underestimate intrinsic motivation. The traditional factory mindset assumes that human beings are inherently lazy, and that we only do complex work when coerced by a paycheck or threatened with being fired.
The carrot and the stick.
Exactly. But the pro-am is driven by obsession. They are writing that printer driver because they want their own printer to work, or because they enjoy the puzzle of reverse engineering proprietary code.
Or for the community aspect.
Yes. They want the status and respect of their peers in the open source community. Status and purpose are incredibly powerful currencies, and they're often way more powerful than money.
I really want to emphasize the shift in leverage here, because 40 years ago, a typical citizen could almost never change the global conversation.
Almost impossible.
Like if you were a barista in 1982 and you somehow came up with a brilliant theoretical model for just-in-time manufacturing, that idea just died in your head. The friction was too high. You couldn't just get a meeting with the CEO of Toyota.
No, you'd be laughed out of the lobby.
Right. But today, that same barista goes on a specialized supply chain forum, posts their theory, and a pro-am community pressure tests it. They iterate on it, and suddenly it gets adopted by a global logistics firm. The barista revolutionized an industry process as a hobbyist.
The web provides the infrastructure to capture that cognitive surplus. All of those hours that used to be spent passively watching television are now being funneled into these massive collaborative projects.
Okay, I have to stop you, though, because if I am a traditional business owner listening to this right now, I am absolutely panicking.
Yeah, you probably should be.
If I'm an entrepreneur running a software company and I have payroll, healthcare costs, office leases, overhead, how on earth do I compete with an army of people who are doing professional work for free just because they love it?
It's a tough spot.
If my competitors are passionate amateurs who view my industry as their weekend puzzle, isn't my traditional business model completely doomed?
If your business relies solely on outproducing them with mediocre compliant labor,
Yes. Yeah.
you are in deep trouble. Because the traditional factory relies on compliance. You pay someone to show up at 9 a.m. and do exactly what they are told until 5 p.m. But factory-level compliance can never, ever be genuine, unbridled obsession.
That makes sense.
An obsessed amateur will work through the night, they'll ignore conventional boundaries, they'll experiment wildly, and they have zero overhead to recoup. If you try to fight that head-on with a top-down corporate structure, you will lose.
So what is the survival strategy? Do I just close up shop and go home?
No, but you have to completely reorient your relationship with these communities. You basically have two viable paths. The first path is to stop trying to compete with the product and instead become the infrastructure. You become the platform that connects the pro-ams.
Give me an example of that. What does that look like?
Look at a company like GitHub. GitHub doesn't write the software that's changing the world. They built the collaborative version control platform that allows millions of pro-am developers to write that software together.
They provided the stage.
Exactly. Or look at Etsy. Etsy doesn't make the artisanal crafts. They provide the marketplace for the passionate amateurs to find their buyers. If you can't beat the free labor of love, become the utility they rely on to execute their passion.
That's a huge pivot. You stop being the factory and start being the power grid.
I love that.
Yes.
What's the second path?
The second path is that you have to tap into that tribal passion yourself. You have to hire the pro-ams and integrate them into your company, not as compliant cogs, but as obsessed creators.
So leaning into the obsession.
Right. Your company's mission has to resonate with the weird, passionate edges of the market. If you are building outdoor gear, you can't just hire people with generic marketing degrees. You need to hire the amateurs who are spending their weekends modifying their own tents and obsessing over ultralight materials.
Passion is the new currency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't fake it, and you definitely can't mandate it from the C-suite. You have to integrate it. This transition from the lone genius to the connected, passionate tribe brings up a really crucial psychological element, I think. It's the difference between isolation and connection, and how that environment fundamentally alters the creator themselves.
The contrast here is so stark. When you are isolated, innovation is incredibly fragile. We tend to romanticize the idea of the lone genius in the cabin, But the reality is that isolation usually destroys weird, nascent ideas before they can ever take root.
You know, whenever I think about the sheer danger of isolation, I always think about Vincent van Gogh from the source text.
Oh, the ultimate example.
He is the archetype of the tortured, isolated genius. He produced some of the most profound art in human history, but he lived in near total geographic and psychological isolation in Arles.
And he suffered greatly for it.
He sold, one painting in his entire lifetime. He was battling severe mental health issues, relying entirely on his brother Theo for support, and he was absolutely convinced that his work would always be shunned by the Academy. He thought he was a total failure.
And we really have to ask ourselves, what would have happened if Van Gogh had access to a digital community? What if the friction of his geographic isolation was just removed?
It's an incredible counterfactual to play out. Imagine Van Gogh, in a moment of extreme self-doubt, pulling out a smartphone and posting a rough, incomplete sketch of The Starry Night on a Discord server dedicated to post-impressionist painters.
Instead of waiting months for a letter.
Right. He doesn't have to wait for Theo to write back. He gets immediate feedback. Imagine the comments coming in. Vincent, the way you're using that thick impasto technique to capture the turbulence in the sky is revolutionary. No one is doing this.
It would have changed everything.
Imagine him having a tribe to validate him, to say, you aren't crazy. You're just seeing the world differently and we want to see more of it.
It's not hyperbole to say that kind of instant connection wouldn't have just changed his career trajectory. It might have saved his life, because isolation kills weirdness. When you are alone and you have an idea that completely violates the normal standards of your immediate physical society, the overwhelming psychological pressure is to abandon it.
You conform to survive.
Exactly. But the effortless connection of tribes today provides a support structure. It reinforces nascent, fragile ideas that would have otherwise been crushed by the weight of local conformity.
Let's contrast Van Gogh's tragedy with a more modern scenario. Say I am a teenager today, and my obsession is learning to play highly technical particular. Steve Winwood riffs on a 12-string acoustic guitar.
Okay, if you were doing that in 1985, you were playing in your bedroom, maybe your parents tell you to turn it down, maybe your friends think it's uncool because they're all listening to synth pop.
Right, that's the end of my feedback loop.
And your skill plateaus because you have no one pushing you. You might just put the guitar in the closet and never play again.
But today, I film a quick video of my fingering technique on the bridge of the song, and I post it to a niche subreddit or YouTube channel dedicated to fingerstyle 12-string guitar.
Exactly, and within an hour, the global nervous system of guitarists reacts. A player in Brazil comments, "Your tempo is great, but try this ultimate tuning. It makes the bass line ring out more."
Okay, yeah.
Another player in Japan posts a video response showing a different way to voice the chord. You see their work, you incorporate it, and your technique improves dramatically overnight.
You're not alone anymore.
You are no longer an isolated player fighting through the frustration by yourself. You are part of a global, pulsating brain of musicians who are actively pushing each other to evolve.
It's the poke-back effect, but applied to skill acquisition. And this brings up a really fascinating point about human behavior. Why do we want to connect with these tribes in the first place? Is it just because we're lonely and want to chat?
Socializing is part of it, definitely, but the data suggests a much deeper psychological driver. If you look at massive behavioral studies like those from the Pew Research Center mapping internet usage, you see a really clear pattern.
What's the pattern?
Well, yes, people enjoy the superficial social involvement, sharing photos, updating statuses, that sort of thing. But what people really crave, the thing that drives deep, sustained engagement, is impact.
Impact over just socializing? Explain the distinction for us.
Socializing is chatting at a coffee shop. Impact is building a cathedral.
Oh, wow. I like that.
People want to be proud of a group they belong to, and they want to accomplish things they couldn't possibly do alone. When the amateur developers are building Wikipedia or Linux, they aren't just socializing, they are leveraging the collective power of the tribe to build a monument.
They want to leave a mark.
Exactly. The tribe gives us the leverage to have an impact that far exceeds our individual capacity.
So tying this back to you, the listener, if you have a nascent idea, a weird project, a bizarre business model, or a passion that feels completely out of step with the mainstream, your absolute first job is not to lock yourself in a room and perfect it in secret.
No, please don't do that.
The lone genius in a cabin model is outdated, it's dangerous, and it is terribly slow. Your first job is to find your tribe.
Yes.
You need to get your rough, imperfect, weird idea out into the world immediately so the feedback loop can start. Find the people who get it so their energy can keep the idea alive when your immediate physical surroundings are telling you to give up.
And once you tap into that feedback loop, you trigger the next major phenomenon of this era, which is the unprecedented acceleration of skill.
Yes.
Because everyone is connected and everyone is showing their work,
Yeah.
the pace at which human beings are mastering complex skills is moving at just breakneck speed.
This is one of my absolute favorite concepts. We are breaking the monopoly on the map. And the best way to visualize this acceleration is by looking at physical disciplines like skateboarding.
Oh yeah, Chris Anderson from TED talks about this perfectly.
He does. Skateboarding is the perfect microcosm for this acceleration. In the 1980s or 90s, the progression of skateboarding was gated by physical geography and slow media.
Right.
If a kid in Southern California, like Rodney Mullen, invented a brand new flat ground trick, how did the rest of the world find out?
It was so slow.
It might take months for a photographer to shoot it, put it in a magazine, and mail it out. Or maybe it got featured in a VHS skate video that was released like once a year. The knowledge transfer was incredibly slow and highly controlled.
The rest of the world was always a year behind California.
Exactly. But look at the mechanism today. A skater lands a never-before-seen trick at a park in Los Angeles. Their friend films it on a smartphone and uploads it to Instagram. It is distributed globally within seconds.
Instantly.
A kid in Tokyo sees it that evening. They go out the next morning, reverse engineer the foot placement by watching the video in slow motion. They master the trick. And then, here is the crucial part, they add a new spin or variation to it and post their own video.
The poke back.
Yes. Then a skater in London sees the Tokyo video, adds a flip out of the trick, and posts it. The skill level of the entire global community is advancing exponentially because the lag time between invention, distribution, and iteration has been eliminated.
Because everyone can see what everyone else is doing in real time. They are constantly raising the baseline for what is physically possible.
And as Anderson pointed out, it's not just skateboarding, it's public speaking too.
Right, TED Talks.
Before TED Talks were put online for free, how many world-class speeches did the average person see in their lifetime? Maybe a political address once in a while?
Very few.
Now we can all watch the greatest orators in the world on demand. We can analyze their pacing, their structure, their use of silence, their body language. The baseline expectation for a good presentation has skyrocketed because the map of how to do it is freely available to everyone.
To really understand how radical it is to have free maps, we need to look at how fiercely we used to protect them. The historical anchor from the text here is the Portuguese government during the Age of Discovery.
The Portuguese map, this story completely blew my mind. Set the scene for us on this one.
Okay, so 500 years ago, the Portuguese were at the absolute forefront of global exploration. They were navigating uncharted oceans, discovering new trade routes around the tip of Africa, and opening up access to spices and wealth that Europe had never seen.
It was revolutionary.
And the knowledge of those routes, the literal maps they were drawing, known as the Padrón Real, were their most valuable state secrets. They kept the master map locked inside the Casa da India in Lisbon.
Because if the Spanish or the British got the map, the Portuguese monopoly on the spice trade was instantly destroyed.
Exactly. So the government made it a treasonous offense to leak or publish a map of their explorations.
Wow.
If you were a sailor and you sold a chart to a foreign entity, you could be executed. The entire economic power of the empire was based on artificial scarcity. They hoarded the information. It was literally hide the map, hoard the knowledge, and force the rest of the world to pay us for the spices because they don't know how to get there.
That was the foundational business model for centuries. Intellectual property, patents, trade secrets, hide the map.
Yeah.
But today, the web violates that old Portuguese law every single second of every day. Everyone is constantly publishing highly detailed maps of their own discoveries.
They're just giving it away.
A developer writes a tutorial on how to configure a complex server architecture. A chef publishes the exact ratios for their award-winning sourdough starter. A marketer gives away their highest converting email templates. We are freely sharing the maps so that other explorers can go faster. Wait, hold on. I need to push back on this hard.
Go for it.
If I'm an entrepreneur, my instinct is to protect my intellectual property. Let's say I spent spent $50,000 and 2 years of my life figuring out a proprietary manufacturing process. You are telling me the modern cultural model is to just write a blog post and give that map away for free.
Basically, yes.
Where is the value? If I give the map to my competitors, how do I pay my mortgage? How does anyone make a living in an open source economy?
It is the central dilemma for legacy businesses, and it requires a complete mental pivot. You have to realize that information itself is no longer scarce. Because distribution is free, you can no longer charge a premium just for access to information. If you try to lock your map in a vault, someone else in the global tribe is going to figure out a similar route and publish it for free anyway, rendering your secret entirely worthless.
So the secret is going to get out no matter what.
Right. If the map is destined to be free, the value shifts. The value is no longer in hoarding the information. The value is in being the most trusted guide.
The trusted guide. I like that phrasing. How does that translate to a business model, though?
Let's use a physical analogy. I can find a highly detailed topographical map of Mount Everest online right now for free.
Sure.
I can read 100 free blogs about how to climb it. I can watch YouTube videos of every step of the ascent. The information is utterly commoditized. But if I actually travel to Nepal and want to survive the climb, I am not going to rely on my free PDF. I'm going to pay tens of thousands of dollars to hire a Sherpa.
Right, because the map tells you where the mountain is, but the Sherpa tells you how to survive the storm that wasn't on the map.
Exactly. I paid for the expert guide who knows the terrain intuitively, who can help me apply the map to my specific physical condition, and who can save me when the context changes.
That's a perfect analogy.
In business, look at a company like Red Hat. They built a multi-billion-dollar enterprise software company around Linux, which is a free open-source operating system. They give away the map.
But they still make money.
Tons of it. Because Fortune 500 companies pay Red Hat massive subscription fees for support, security, implementation, and consulting. They pay for the Sherpa.
Furthermore, there is immense value in being the hub where the explorers gather. If you are the person openly sharing the most accurate, most helpful maps, if you are publishing the best tutorials, the best teardowns, the best templates, you attract the tribe to you.
You build trust.
You build trust and authority. You become the gravitational center of that niche. And once you have the attention and trust of a highly engaged tribe, the monetization opportunities are thinless. You can sell premium implementation services, you can host conferences, you can build specialized software tools that only that tribe needs.
That's exactly.
So the practical takeaway for you listening is this. Stop hoarding your knowledge. Your secret sauce probably isn't as secret as you think it is, and someone is going to open source it eventually. Beat them to it. Share your knowledge freely. Publish your map. Elevate your entire field.
Right, because by doing so, you stop being a nameless competitor and you become the beacon that attracts the tribe. You position yourself as the indispensable guide.
Which leads us to the final and perhaps the most culturally significant shift we need to discuss. The normalization of weird and the absolute blindness of mass marketers to this reality.
We've been using this word tribe a lot, but this is where the psychology of the tribe really comes into focus.
Yeah.
Because of this effortless digital connection, feeling weird is suddenly a completely different experience than it was 30 years ago.
First, we probably need to redefine what we mean by weird.
Definitely. In this context, weird doesn't mean something negative or creepy or broken.
Yeah.
It simply means making a choice that goes against the grain of the mass, normal center.
It's just specialized.
Right. It means having a hyper-specific passion or a unique aesthetic or a highly specialized way of doing things that the majority of the population wouldn't understand or care about.
Right. Being obsessed with restoring vintage 1920s typewriters is weird. Being a vegan competitive powerlifter is weird. Dedicating your weekends to speedrunning obscure Nintendo 64 games is weird.
Precisely. And historically, geography was the enemy of the weird.
Geography.
How so?
If you lived in a small town of 5,000 people in the 1980s, and you were the only person obsessed with restoring vintage typewriters, you were isolated. The social pressure of the physical community was designed to force you to conform, to push you back into the normal middle of the bell curve.
You were just the town oddball.
Yeah. But today, the internet allows you to bypass the geography of your small town entirely.
You log onto a forum or a subreddit or a Discord server, and you instantly find 10,000 other people scattered across the globe who are equally obsessed with finding replacement ribbons for an Underwood No. 5 typewriter. And here is the profound psychological shift. Once you find those 10,000 people, your behavior doesn't feel weird anymore. Social acceptance within that specific micro-community actually makes your niche behavior feel completely normal.
It redefines your baseline.
Yes. To you, inside your digital tribe, restoring typewriters is the baseline standard of existence. You aren't the outcast on the fringe of your physical town. You are the respected center of your own digital universe.
The bell curve has completely flattened out. We've migrated away from a single monolithic normal center, and we've splintered into millions of hyper-specific weird tribes.
And this splintering is completely breaking the brains of traditional mass marketers.
It is destroying them because they are blind to the structural change. The entire architecture of the mass marketing industry, the advertising agencies, the Nielsen ratings, the demographic blobs was built on a single premise.
Find a giant clump of normal people and sell them an average thing.
Let me throw an analogy at this because I think it perfectly captures why legacy brands are struggling so much. Think of the traditional mass marketer as a fisherman operating a massive lumbering factory ship.
Okay, a factory ship.
For decades, their strategy was simple. Sail to the middle of the ocean and drop a gigantic, heavy net to catch a single colossal species of fish. Let's call it the normal whale.
And for a long time, in the era of 3 television networks and localized radio, there were enough of those normal whales clustered in the center to keep the factory running.
Exactly. The net was blunt, it caught a lot of bycatch, it was expensive to operate, but it worked because the target was huge and slow. But the digital revolution changed the ecosystem of the ocean. That giant clump of normal whales has completely dispersed. They don't exist anymore.
So what replaced them in this analogy?
Millions of incredibly fast, highly specialized schools of rare fish. You've got a tight school of neon tetras darting over a coral reef here, and a specialized school of deep-sea anglerfish operating in the trenches down there.
They're everywhere, but they're specific.
Right. They speak different languages, they hang out in different parts of the ocean, and they want very different things. But the mass marketer on the factory ship doesn't know how to adapt. They are still stubbornly dropping this massive, heavy, incredibly expensive net into the empty center of the ocean, coming up with nothing, and wondering where all the fish went.
It's a perfect analogy. Their equipment, their factory mindset, their generic messaging, their reliance on broad demographics like women aged 1834 isn't designed to catch rare fish.
Not at all.
They don't know how to speak the specific, nuanced language of a microtribe. They only know how to yell at the ocean with a megaphone. They're trying to water down their products and their art to avoid offending anyone, hoping to appeal to a non-existent giant clump in the middle.
So the ultimate practical takeaway here for you, the creator, the entrepreneur, the artist, stop watering down your work. Stop trying to shave off your rough edges to appeal to everyone. If you make something designed to appeal to everyone, you've made something so boring that it appeals to absolutely no one.
The center is gone.
The mass market is dead. Your job is to organize, service, and work directly with the small, deeply engaged tribes at the edges. You have to embrace their weirdness, learn their specific language, and most importantly, embrace your own weirdness.
If we pull all of these threads together, we arrive at a very clear, defining insight for this era. We have to fundamentally accept that creation is no longer a top-down broadcast controlled by a few wealthy gatekeepers.
It's a totally different landscape.
It is a vibrant, chaotic, highly accelerated, bottom-up tribal conversation. Because creation is amplified, the whole concept of a mass market of normal people has fractured. We are actively replacing the old, rigid factories of compliance with thriving, connected ecosystems of passionate amateurs.
And that is exactly why this matters to you right now. You possess an unprecedented amount of power to make a dent in the universe. You have the tools to find your specific people, to build your tribe, and to create something incredibly meaningful without ever asking anyone for permission.
The gatekeepers are gone.
The tools are free. The map is open source. The only thing holding you back at this point is the lingering fear of standing out. That leftover legacy programming from the factory era telling you to keep your head down and be normal.
You have to shed that programming. The rewards now belong to the weird, the obsessed, and the connected.
So we've seen how amplified creation is giving everyone a voice and tearing down those old walls. We've seen how the passionate amateur can organize to rival the massive corporation. But what happens when we take this explosive new power to create And we combine it with a historical explosion of wealth, unprecedented consumer choice, and hyper-efficient targeted marketing.
That is going to be a fascinating conversation.
That fascinating collision where infinite capital meets infinite weirdness is exactly what we'll be unpacking in our next deep dive. Until then, stop hiding your math, stop worrying about the massive corporate competitors, and go find your tribe of passionate amateurs.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.